Thank you for tuning in to this new episode of the To Freedom podcast. I am your host, Marina Theron-Monnery. Today I am welcoming my guest, Dr. Geha Gonthier. Geha is a doctor of acupuncture. She currently lives in Edmonton, Alberta, where she owns and operates a holistic wellness clinic. She has been practicing Asian medicine for 49 years, teaches yoga, qigong, meditation, breathwork, and shiatsu. She grew up in Vienna and lived in various places in the US before settling in Edmonton 22 years ago. Geha loves to garden and to spend time at her acreage, where she hosts intimate gatherings, inviting participants to walk the medicine trail, a vision quest designed to help us connect to ancient wisdom and current purpose. Hello, Geha. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've been really looking forward to this conversation with you.
As have I, my dear Marina. I love the subject matter. I love your new podcast, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you so much. And Geha, I've met you a few years ago when you were our guest on the opening. And there was just such a connection for me with you. And ever since I was a child, I really had a hard time with superficial conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And what really made me excited was when I could really go deep with people. And for some reason, when I met you, I don't know if we had a pre-recording interview or if I met you right at the recording. I cannot remember. But man, I just felt that deep connection with you and, kept in touch over the years. And as I'm starting to prepare for this new podcast, you popped up on Facebook and you said something on Facebook. I'm like, oh, I have to get you back. I have to talk to you. So I'm so grateful that you're here.
Thank you so very much. I actually didn't think that we had a recording interview because Fran brought me on and she and I had had a conversation previously, So we just started that podcast basically more or less like we're doing right now.
Yes.
So what was it that I said on Facebook? Do you remember?
I think you were talking about your acreage, which we will get to later in the conversation today.
Okay.
And it was, I think, Geha, what really speaks to me is I've always admired your calm kindness that you bring into every conversation.
Thank you.
And I know that this kind of peace normally comes from quite a journey. And I don't know, there's just something that I feel so familiar whenever I talk to you. I feel so at ease. I feel as if we speak the same language, and I just absolutely love that.
I can very much relate to that, Marina. Yes.
Oh, thank you. So it was wonderful for me to get your form, to have a little conversation with you a few days ago, and just reconnect and then revisit your story. And today we're going to talk a lot about your journey to where you are today, your wonderful clinic, your acreage, and everything that you do. But you grew up in Vienna, and at the age of 21, you moved to New York.
Yes.
And I know that I think you only had a visa for 6 months, but something shifted for you. And it's such a young age to start to change your life. So why don't you go through that journey with us?
Yeah, I'd love to. When I was 21, and I just finished university and I studied dance and philosophy, which is a very unusual combination to begin with. And there was a particular dance teacher, Alvin Nikolai, who had a school in New York, and I really wanted to study with him. So I got a student visa and, had $300 in my pocket, felt very rich, not having any idea how expensive New York was, even in the late 70s. And $300 didn't get me very far. But one of the things that did get me very far was the attitude. I really felt that there was so much possibility in New York. Growing up in Vienna at that time, there was still quite a restrictive society. Things were categorized in different ways. You had to show up in different ways. The social status was very important. New York didn't really have that. At least that wasn't my experience. So New York was this exciting, and of course it was also the time of Studio 54. So it was so exciting. It was so mind opening, and it really felt like there was a lot of possibility there. So
So
my
what made you decide to stay?
basically that I felt free. I felt like I could take off a particular coat that I had to wear or a particular pair of shoes that was just a little bit too tight for me. And I could dance
Interesting.
barefoot. And so that was very exciting for me. And even though New York was very hard, being a dancer and not really having a work permit and, starting to work off the books and how do you stay and, all these things. There were so many different hurdles. But of course, when you're 21, some of these hurdles don't seem to be as huge because, literally the world belongs to you. But it was this step into potential, into, oh, here I can explore myself in a different way than I was allowed to in Vienna. And that was amazing for me.
So talk to me about life in Vienna, because to most of, I mean, we are in Canada, and if I have to ask somebody today, would you rather live in Vienna or here? I think a lot of people would say Vienna, and yet there was something about Vienna that you didn't feel comfortable with. Tell me about the culture, the way that you felt you couldn't be free.
Well, the culture in Vienna, and please remember that this was, nearly 50 years ago,
Yeah,
um, it was quite restrictive. The social status of who you had to be, what you could do, the different the different ways of how we related to one another. I mean, even in school, there I had some colleagues that only put you in their address book if you had a title. Now, officially, there was no title anymore since 1914, but still, the culture was still alive. And
yeah,
for me, my mother also was an immigrant. So my grandparents were immigrants. They had fled Romania in the Second World War. And so they had an accent, they were weird. So I was also a foreigner. And
interesting.
things now have changed quite a bit. But in those days, it was quite difficult to be that. At least I experienced it like that. And I always tried to fit in, and I never quite found that I fit in. I was a little bit different and strange, and I had a perspective that people found ridiculous. So New York
Interesting.
was this amazing opening where my soul just said, oh, yes, let me explore that. Because there I found curiosity. There I found people willing to experiment. And of course, it was also the zeitgeist at that time in New York.
So from New York, you did you keep dancing?
For a while, but I also ventured into more stage and acting. And I went to acting school and I did little, soap opera, a little movie, a little
Cute.
stage, nothing really huge or big, just like these little jobs that you try to keep yourself afloat. And in between working as a waitress, as
I
so
did not
many,
know that about you. That's so interesting.
yeah. But
I had
also,
a bit of a stage career as well, so I can relate to that.
yes. But also one of the things that happened in New York, and that was really by accident, which of course now turns out was not an accident at all. I shortly after I arrived in New York, I actually got connected um, with shiatsu. I simply took a weekend course just because of interest in Oriental diagnosis. Just the name sounded really, really interesting to me. And Wataru Ohashi, who turned out to be a very famous shiatsu teacher, was teaching the course. And it was actually the last course where he taught the full curriculum of shiatsu. And I had the privilege of actually being there with him and taking that course. And it was super curious for me and super interesting, because when I learned about that style of diagnosis, and I learned about how my voice, the way that we gesture, our scent, our expressions, how they all shape who we are, and the diagnosis that a skilled health practitioner then can deduct from. That was incredibly fascinating to me. And that
Amazing.
actually started my journey into Asian medicine.
So you went from being an artist, an actress, dancer, into well-being. So that's quite a significant shift.
Well, I did both of those things at the same time. You know,
Okay.
it wasn't like an either or. It was very much and. Because shortly after that, and I had lived in New York for a few years at that time, I also, became a massage therapist, and I studied reflexology, and I got into essential oils. And it was just sort of a parallel thing that also
Interesting.
interested me. Because one of the things that also became very clear to me was that in the artistic world, particularly television, there were so many things that I didn't agree with. So
Mhm.
many things. Because I
Yeah.
just felt women weren't portrayed correctly. I felt that some of the things that were expressed were so demeaning to humanity. And one of the things that was always so important for me was I always wanted to change the world. I know that sounds huge, but from and I don't know really where that came from, but I always thought there was so much more potential to humanity, to human beingness, than what we lived. And I was
I love
really
that. I
curious to
love that
explore
about you,
that.
just seeing that and that heart, your heart to be the change in the world. I just absolutely love,
Mm.
I've always loved that about you. So it's
Thank
very
you.
beautiful. So from New York, what journey did you take? Tell us more about that.
Well, from New York, I actually, again, by mistake, I was about to go on tour with the Little Prince. There was
Oh, yeah.
right, and I played the Little Prince, and that was actually one of my favorite roles that I ever
Love
played.
it. Yeah.
And on the way there, I was, as I was getting ready and packing and blah 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 blah, I was I found was introduced to a book by this mystic called Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, later known as Osho. And that was such a profound experience for me, because I read that book cover to cover in one go. I could not stop. I was laughing, I was crying, and I felt seen,
Mm.
and really seen. And that was profound for me. So when I had the opportunity to go and join his community in Oregon, I did that. And again, it was one of those things, sort of like New York. Hadn't planned to stay in New York. And when I went to the ranch, to Rajneeshpuram, I also hadn't planned to stay there, because at that time, my career in New York was actually just about to take off. I had a few contracts going. But once I was there, I knew that this is where I had to be. So I dropped everything and moved there. And I lived there for 2 years, 2.5 years. And, I know it has that community got a bad rep. Well, actually, everything that happened behind the scenes. And there were a lot of things behind the scenes that undoubtedly were less than stellar, let's say that. And there's a lot of people that would use much stronger words than that. But there were also a lot of things that were amazing and wonderful. And for me, it was an eye opener because for me, I also connected to a lot of people who, just like me, wanted to make that positive difference in the world, wanted to create community around love, around meditation, around mindfulness, around living in harmony with the earth, around not healing together with the earth, you know. And
I think it's such a graceful thing to be able to have to take the positive and the lessons and move on with that and to forgive with grace the bad and move on
Mhm.
from that as well.
Yes. Yes, you know, and there was definitely a lot of heartache that happened, and there were a lot of people that were really angry, and that a lot of people that got really hurt. I totally understand that, and it breaks my heart to know that that aspect was part of something that was so meaningful for me. But I simply cannot discard the meaning that it held for me, you know?
Yeah, the growth, beautiful.
Yeah, yeah.
And from there, you went to Maui.
Well, not quite. From there, first I went to Carmel, California, and that was a fun adventure because Carmel, California is a wonderful place to live. And I lived there and then in Big Sur. And Big Sur, that was sort of like 3 years of living my Zen monk fantasy because I lived in a cabin up in the woods and I only had
Oh,
cold
nice.
running water and I didn't have a toilet. You know, I had a little shovel and I would go out into the woods and I learned a lot about silence and I learned
Oh, yeah.
a lot about myself. And it was not without challenges, let's say that, but it was also a very, very meaningful time in my life.
That sounds absolutely amazing. I think, sometimes when I think of the little cabin and solitude in the wood, it's almost like my soul longs for that, to just do that. I kind of create solitude for myself a lot just where I am.
Mhm,
I think to be there and I'm almost forced to just sit with yourself. I think
mhm.
that's such a gift.
Yes, yes. And it was
Awesome.
wonderful, and it was a wonderful community there also, you know, people really down to earth. Because when you live in the mountains there and Big Sur, you know, there are lots of floods, there are lots of fires. You're really connected with nature. It isn't just beautiful like in a tourist prospect, you know, it is actually real, down to earth country living with many challenges. And
Amazing. So,
yes,
and then from there, you went
and from
to,
there I went to Maui. From there I lived on Maui, and that was, well, that was really heaven on earth. That was 10 years living off grid in a small little community right by the ocean, living in a yurt, growing a lot of my own food and or our own food and whatever we didn't grow, you know, because I was a body worker at that time and I had already started to explore some acupuncture. I was working a lot in the community with the community, and I was sort of like the local healer. And that was, of course, great practice. And it was a very, very meaningful time. It was also
that,
challenging from there coming back because, you know, that was in the 90s, that was in the entire 90s. And of course, in the 90s is when the internet came and technology came up, and I was still chopping wood and carrying water.
hmm,
So that whole journey, that whole beginning got completely lost to me. So when I stepped into that, um, it was like stepping into a onto a different planet, you know.
I can just imagine. I can just imagine. So from Maui, did you
Mhm.
come to Canada?
I did.
Okay.
I did.
And I know that, for most people, it sounds like such a weird decision to make, but I know that you made that decision from your soul.
I did.
So tell me about that.
Well, you know, after the first time I came here, and I came here for a seminar, And I went back to Maui, and I will never forget that moment when I was standing by the cliffs, because that's where our little community was, and it happened to be a full moon night, so it was very magical, and the full moon was reflected in the ocean, and it was so beautiful, and I just was incredibly grateful for being there and living there and being able to have this amazing life. And as I was saying thanks to that, there was this little voice that said, "You're going to go back to Maui. You're going to go back to Edmonton. You're going to live in Edmonton." And that was a shock to my bones. I never, it was just such a huge shock. And I kept arguing with myself. I kept arguing with that little voice for weeks. And then finally I said, well, if there's something there for me, I better go check it out. So I came back to Edmonton, just rented a space for a couple of months just to see what it would be like. I could not relate to the culture. I could not, it was so foreign to me. And then I was in Edmonton, and I was walking by a sort of an this is an apartment building, and there was this scent coming out of this apartment building, and the scent of that meal that was cooked brought me right back into my childhood, brought me back to poverty, brought me back to the cheap oils, the cheap ingredients that we had to use, brought me back, and I just burst into tears.
Oh.
And I knew I had to come here and heal this. I knew I had to face this because I'd always been running away from it. And I knew there was no more running away. Now it was the time to look at this. And so
Absolutely beautiful.
I did.
I spoke with somebody yesterday about how we have to break the cycles in ourselves to move forward and sometimes face pain from the past so that we can get to where we should be in our lives. To me, I think my entire journey is to be my authentic self, unapologetically, and to find freedom in me being myself. And so it's so amazing to hear that you had to go to a place like Edmonton to heal. Now, for those people who do not know, Canada has some of the most beautiful places on this planet. Banff, Lake Louise, especially our province of Alberta. So I'm in Calgary, Geha is in Edmonton. Edmonton is a city that I think gets looked down upon a lot. So it's not that beautiful Banff. It's not as close to the Rockies as Calgary. We cannot see the Rockies, even though it has beautiful rivers. I think Edmonton is a beautiful city in its own right. But, when you look at the superficial, people won't understand. But you did not look at that. You looked deep inside you. This was your
Well,
place of healing.
I did look at it in the beginning very superficially because I came from this paradise, from this tropical paradise.
Right.
So living in a round space, living in a yurt is very different from living with electricity and in
Mm.
square spaces. It seems so odd, but unless you have actually experienced that, you don't one really has a difficulty understanding. Now, after having lived in Edmonton for more than 20 years, I love it. I've learned
Amazing.
so much. I
And now you
see
have the snow.
I see the world. I see Edmonton through a different lens, you know?
I love it. I love it.
Mm.
I would love to know the lens. Tell me about that lens. What do you see?
Well, what I see is actually I see people. And one of the
Mm.
things that I think is so beautiful, Edmonton, there's a lot of really beautiful people here. Because one of the things that I find is in Edmonton, people go deep. You have to, the environment, that pretty harsh environment of very, very cold and very long winters and sometimes very hot or wet, as in this case, summers, it invites you to go deep within. It invites you to root deep within. So I've had some of the most meaningful conversations that I've ever had here, also in Edmonton, with people that are willing to open their heart in ways that is not so easily available. And some of that, Marina, might also be a reflection of where I am at. I totally realize
Isn't that
as well.
true? Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that open door. And you know, I referred a client to you a while back, and well, she was very sick in hospital in Edmonton. I went to visit her, and I was really touched by the friendliness
Mhm.
of the people in that hospital.
Mhm.
Strangers who would just start to have a conversation. And one lady, you know what? You should go down to that store there. They have a big sale on beautiful clothes. And I mean, where on earth would that happen? That's a fairly big city.
Mhm.
I was just blown away by that. It's almost like an openness that I don't
Yes.
know.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
That's quite amazing. So, Gaia, I want to go a little bit deeper in our conversation now because, you know, it's I mean, one thing that I see in you is that it seems like from the beginning, from the day you left Vienna, you uh, you've always been seeking for something.
Yes.
And you know, you went through the Osho commune, and you look back at all of that with so much wisdom and everything that drew you there. And then you went to Maui and you kind of lived off the grid and then ended up in starting over again in Edmonton. But I want to get to freedom because when you filled out my form, you wrote that you were seeking freedom from limiting beliefs,
Yes.
cultural constraints, and narrow perspective. So talk to me about that because I think those limiting beliefs, even for me today, it's still I have to fight against it every single day.
Mhm. I very much relate to that. And it's not so much that I fight against them. I think that's the beauty about aging is that we have the opportunity to reflect back. What are the beliefs that held us back? And as we continue, at least in my journey, as I continue on my journey, I see that anything that has ever held me back has been my belief. So maybe looking back, it wasn't even the restraints of the culture in Vienna. It was the restraints that I felt because of how I thought I needed to show up in order to belong.
Mm, mm,
Somebody may have seen it very differently, but for me, that's what it was. And now I am really careful and very curious to see where am I holding myself back? Where am I not seeing the potential? Where am I buying into a belief system that is actually much narrower than who I am? And I think the real beauty is that right now, as a collective, we as humanity, we're beginning to understand that we are so much more than we have been told,
yeah.
than we have allowed ourselves to be. So, what is it that we need permission? What is that particular permission slip that is needed for us in order to really live everything that we can? I mean, if you think about things like, Einstein saying that we only use about 10% of our brain or however many
Mm,
percentages of that, right? Well, what about the other 90? And
right.
what were to happen when we actually um, tap into that? How can we as humanity, who is, sometimes people say, oh, we are part of nature. No, 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 we are not part of nature. We are nature. We are
Mm,
nature
mm,
that has been inspired literally by spirit. But
yeah.
this body is an accumulation of all the different, blueberry muffins, bananas, chicken broths that I have ingested, that the body miraculously in, I think the body does something like 2 million cell processes every second. I mean, we can't even imagine that, right? Of course
No.
not. And yet this is what's happening all the time. So There is so much more potential here. And if we look at astrology, but also if we look at the perspective of all the different prophecies of what this time is all about, this is a time of remembering who we are. Not
I love it.
discovering, but remembering, right? So because before that you brought up my acreage, and that is one
Right.
of the things that I really want to support all of us, and me included. It's not like I'm the big teacher and everybody else is just, learning from me. I think we're all coming together here. Is setting a stage for us to remember who we are, by remembering the different aspects, by remembering the 5 elements, for instance, within us. In sacred geometry, we have the 5 solids. And those are 5 geometric forms that basically are the basis of our sacred geometry. So when we learn about that, and every single medicine actually has that as a foundation, except for potentially what we call, modern medicine, modern Western medicine, which really only has started in like the 17th century, so, but everything before that was always based on these 5 elements and of that very insightful perspective that it is these 5 elements that makes up nature and that makes up us. So these platonic solids form the foundation. And the other thing to consider is that the universe is mental. And that brings me back to what you had asked before about the limitations. If the universe is mental, then what are the mental limitations that I have adhered to that keep me in a place that is smaller than what I am?
I so love this, Geha. I I don't know why things would come to me in my life, but a few years ago, I started to meditate. And one of the things that just came to me from somewhere is remember who you are.
Mm.
And I really dug into that. What does that mean? And in my journey of coming from a background of childhood trauma and learning from a young age that, in a sense, this human part of me was not good enough. I
Mm.
had to peel that away and remember who I really am and find the true me. So when you say that, it just really touched my heart. And then also, the power we have within us to live our full potential, whatever it may be. And like you say, I don't even think we can comprehend what that means. And we have so much at our disposal in our minds alone that I think it's so untapped. And I so love your passion about this. So it's just, oh my goodness, you talk about human potential. And, so after nearly 50 years of walking alongside people on their healing journeys, talk to me more about this potential. What do you think we underestimate about ourselves?
Everything. Everything. I don't know if I can if I can narrow that down, but I think our ability, we do not quite understand our ability to actually manifest our life. Each of us, we are fractals of a much bigger whole. It's sort of like part of a wave, not just one wave, but like part of a wave in the ocean. And as such, there's always different aspects to us. And I think a lot of the times we try to control that by adhering to systems that we have created. And I wonder what it would be like, sort of like nature, if we allowed our natural talents to simply evolve and use them for the highest good. I think so much of us, so much of our human existence, and so much of our current, at least Western, and there might be other societies that I'm not so fully aware of, but so much of the Western perspective is based on scarcity. We talk about abundance, but it is based on scarcity because there's a few people that are mighty, mighty rich, and there's a lot of people that are mighty, mighty poor. And there's something that is not, shall we say, graceful within that. There's something that is not natural within that. There's something that is not joyful within that. And I feel that we as humans, our potential to be in joy, to be in freedom, to lift one another up, to celebrate life together, and also to celebrate death. Because there's so much that we avoid transitions because we do not understand the importance of transitions.
So I hear this, and what comes up to me is how controlled we are by fear, whether it's fear of not having enough, fear of death, fear of not being as good as other people. And don't you think freedom from fear is one of the ultimate freedoms we can give ourselves?
Absolutely. And you know, and fear, that I do have a caveat there because there is a natural fear that is healthy, because sometimes fear also shows you, whoa, there's danger, I can't go there. But to know that fear from a cultural induced fear,
Yeah.
those are two different things, right? There is something that is a very natural response of our intuition that says, whoa, can't go there. You know, right here is a cliff.
Well, I think it's more that the one that you talk about, the cultural induced one. Let me give you an example from my own life right now. I said to you earlier that I have to fight every single day against my limiting beliefs. This morning I was sitting with posting some of these videos in which I know in this podcast become extremely vulnerable about my own story that in the past I would have never spoken about it culturally because it's a big no-no. You don't talk about that. You don't bring this out in the open. You pretend that that never happened. You pretend that everything is perfect. I had to really become full of courage to do this, to write my book, to talk about it. But sometimes I go and I publish a podcast or I put it on social media. And for a while back, it's as if I cannot breathe. And that is my fear that I have to overcome.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. That is really, really beautiful. But you know what? That is where art begins, right there, in that fear. That goes, right? But it is that courage, that, courage, that following your cœur, your heart, that is where your art truly begins. And
Well,
so I congratulate
it's
you.
my heart. It's why I'm here. And sometimes you have to be looking at the bigger picture and not at the narrowness of that fear and that old conditioning. You have to look at the bigger picture of all of this. There's a reason, there's a purpose. There's a reason I'm doing this. And it's something that's much bigger than me.
So what is the reason for you?
It's it's a long journey, Geha. It's a long journey of living under an umbrella of opinions that was never mine and sculpting my life accordingly until I remembered who I am, until I peeled away all those layers and healed my nervous system who responded to that, and just have the courage to be me, speak the truth. And knowing that we are in an age, I think, where so many of us feel called to be the change in the world. And sometimes I think to myself, if one person reads my book and feels that it's helped them, that's perfect. If one person listened to you and me today and feel that, wow, if they can do it, so can I. Don't you think we've been successful? Don't you think we've done
Absolutely.
what we were called to do?
Yes.
Yeah. And that's my why.
Mhm.
And it gives me something to look forward to. It gives me life. I'm one of those people, if I have nothing to do, I feel quite down. I love being busy. I love doing things, and I love things with depth. I love conversations like this.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's beautiful. Well, let's move on. So, uh, bringing it all together, when I listened to your story, when I reflected on conversations we've had, read your form that you filled out for me, I can almost see the threads connecting your life from Vienna to New York to the commune to Maui and finally to Edmonton. And it feels as though everything that you've lived has been preparing you to create
Absolutely.
this beautiful business you have today, from your clinic that you have in Edmonton to your acreage. So you've created something so special.
Thank you.
So why don't you walk us through that?
Well, it was so interesting. Before I actually came to Edmonton, I had an astrologer reading with, and it was a very famous Vedic astrologer who happened to rent space there in Maui, and he usually works with a lot of, movie stars and things like that. And he happened to be our neighbor. And so he gave me a reading. And one of the things that he said to me, he said, in many previous lifetimes, you've always been a meditator. You have lived much of your life in monasteries. You are comfortable in this environment. But this life, you are supposed to step out. You are supposed to go into the business world. And he said, and in about 6 months, your life will change, and in a few years you will look back and you won't even believe that you lived the way that you did, because you're going to be completely involved in business.
Oh,
And I will never forget, I walked away. I was barefoot. I didn't even own shoes when I lived on Maui. And I walked down to the property where I lived in, and there was just at the entrance there was this beautiful ylang ylang vine, and it was at the early evening, and so all the blossoms had opened and it was flowering, and so the scent of this ylang ylang was just intoxicating. And I walked through this. It was because it went from one tree over to another tree and down again. It was just phenomenal. And I walked through this and I said, there, I will never leave this. Well, 6 months later, I came to Edmonton. And you already know the beginning of that story. And then when I was in Edmonton, it became clear to me that, okay, for some reason, I need to be here. There's something that I need to heal here. This is what needs to happen. I decided that the only thing really that made sense to me was, again, to step into healing and not only, complete my diploma, my doctor for acupuncture and things like that, but also to create a wellness center. And a wellness center that included more than just the usual, massage and acupuncture, but that also included facials, that also included things that were generally not so much used to being part of a wellness center, at least not here in Canada. that was very much a European model, because I wanted people to be able to have access to as many modalities as possible. Because for some person it is homeopathy, for some person it is simply an infrared sauna, for somebody it is important to understand their astrology and what their cosmic blueprint is. For some people acupuncture, for some people massage, everybody has their own resonance also at different times in their life. So I wanted to gather different healers together that understood that and create a center where people would come and feel safe, sort of like a sanctuary on the outside that would reflect the sanctuary on the inside that we're all hopefully a little bit familiar with. And if not, at least be able to remember that we have that on the inside. So
Oh, that's
that's
so
why I
beautiful. And
started.
I can actually give a testimony to this because I talked earlier about the client I referred to you. She was in Edmonton and she was going through a very difficult time. And I contacted you and I got her in touch with your clinic, and it gave her a sanctuary. She passed away gracefully. She's on the other side. But it really was such a beautiful place for her to go to in the last few months of her life. And you gave that to her. And I think wellness is not always trying to keep us alive. I think wellness is also to gracefully help us in any circumstances that we present. Of course, a lot of us want to stay healthy, but you gave her, your clinic gave her a sanctuary, and she went into a few different modalities at your clinic, and she loved it.
That is so meaningful. Thank you.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay, I
Yes.
want to tell me about the medicine walk, the medicine trail at your acreage. How does that work? What do you do?
Well, again, this was another one of those coincidences that happened because I was actually on my way to go to Vienna to spend a couple of months with my 90-year-old mom there. And when I saw on Facebook, one of my friends had talked about this fairyland in Edmonton. And I'm going, fairyland outside of Edmonton? I have to check that out. And so I went there. I didn't really mean to buy anything or anything like that. I just wanted to see it. And I went there and I thought it was great. And I immediately called a few people and I said, it's really sweet. It needs some work, but it's really, really nice. And it's in this nice area by Chikaku Lake, and it's just beautiful. And so told a few people who I knew were looking for acreages. And then I had a dream. And in the dream, the acreage spoke to me and said, you need to steward us.
Oh,
And I've had enough incidences like that in my life to know that when something like this happens, I just need to follow that. And so I did. And everything fell into place unbelievably fast because I was literally on my way to Vienna. So it was incredibly fast. I had a friend of mine drive all the way from Newfoundland to come and, help with things while I was gone to, repair things, do things. Anyway, it's been now, this is my third summer. We've done a lot of work, and I have found out that the indigenous name of that piece of land is Muskiki Meskana, which basically means medicine trail.
amazing.
And it was so interesting because I found that out after I had invited a few friends of mine to walk the medicine trail with me. Because I wanted to, again, coming back to those 5 elements, I wanted to create a little journey, a journey of remembering those 5 elements within us. through ceremony, through ritual, through sharing, through movement, through silence, through all the different tools that we have available, just to set that seed of remembering. Or if that seed had already been set, to expand on that seed, to water it, to help it flower, to walk that medicine trail together, understanding that this is just like one little incident, but in truth, we all walk a medicine trail, because that is what life really is walking this medicine trail. And so that was my idea behind it.
How beautiful. I cannot wait to see it. I'm so glad you're close to me. So very glad. And there's so many things that we can continue in this conversation for a long, long time. But as our time is wrapping up here, I ask every guest this question, Geha. What does freedom mean to you today?
Freedom to me means trusting myself, trusting my heart, and having the courage to follow it without restraint.
I love it. We talked a little bit before we started to record today about, even in astrology, you said that everything is pointing out the importance of freedom.
Mm-hmm. Yes, 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 yes. We are right now with different astrological constellations. We are at a place of a huge shift, for humanity, and much of it has to do with freedom. You know, like there are some constellations that remind us of this of the 60s. There's some constellations that remind us of the time of the French Revolution and the American Revolution and the European freedom wars and things like that. And right now, what is amazing is that all of this is coming together. So there are so many different things that are coming together. It is literally like a seed is opening. And this particular month of July that we're just starting today is potentially going to be vital for all of us. So I am looking forward to see what it is that I can potentially dive into internally, what I allow myself to see, what my dreams bring, because I feel that a lot of the times it's those messages from the subconscious that help us to remember if we're open for that. And that's why I also feel that our limiting beliefs deserve the opportunity to be looked at, so that we go, oh, that is actually something that's holding me together a little bit narrow. Let something wider in me open, sort of like a lotus. You know how the lotus, that most ancient flower on our planet, grows out of the mud? It is time for all of us to grow out of the mud.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I'm so grateful, Geha, that we could have this conversation. That's deep, deep conversation today. The kind that really gives me life. And I trust that people watching or listening to this would feel exactly the same energy that you and I feel right now. Your clinic, Wellness on White in Edmonton. For those of you who are in Edmonton, I encourage you to get in touch. But I know that there are some services that you offer online as well. So if people just go online and Google Wyatt on White, will they get access to that?
Absolutely. Yeah. If you Google Wellness on White, you will get access to our in-clinic as well as our online offerings. And there's many things that we offer online.
Yes.
And, we also, one of the things that I'm really, really super happy, because we talked about restrictive belief systems. I have now also an RTT specialist, so a clinical hypnotherapist, and we are inviting another hypnotherapist to join our team. And what I find is so incredibly wonderful about these practices is that they bypass the belief system, but they go deep within and really help us unravel some of the things that hold us back, that help that make us, fall into that same hole again and again and again, right? And it is so important to get that kind of support where we can go, I can open here.
Right. I love RTT. I'm qualified in RTT, so
Oh,
it's something very
wonderful.
close to my heart. Yeah, such a wonderful gift. So absolutely amazing. And I just want to tell our listeners that Wellness on White, the white is WHYTE.
Correct.
So it's different. There's a White Avenue, if I'm not mistaken, in Edmonton, and
In
that's
Edmonton,
where it is.
yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes, 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 yes.
Geha, bless you. Thank you so very much for being with us today and sharing so much of your story and yourself, your beautiful spirit with us. I cannot be more grateful for you.
Thank you so much for inviting me to your podcast. Thank you.
You're very welcome. We will talk again.
We will talk again. Lovely conversation. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.
Thank you so much to Dr. Geha Gonthier for sharing her incredible story and wisdom with us today. You will find all of her links in the description of this episode. And thank you for joining me for this episode of To Freedom. If you enjoyed our conversation, please follow the podcast, subscribe, whether you're watching or listening, and share this episode with someone who could benefit from it. It really does help these conversations reach more people. Until next time, keep choosing freedom.